Hey guys, this is Madela. A few weeks ago, I was researching on something for my art toys and I came across this very interesting world of creatures, not just ordinary creatures, but of course Filipino folklore, written very intelligently in form of comics. And I'm speaking of no other than TRESE. And I have been hooked since then. Also, I also have been able to get in touch with the creators of TRESE, Sir Budjette Tan, and of course the illustrator Kajo Baldissimo. And I was able also to attend a workshop, like a talk with Sir Budjette. And today I would like to share with you that very special reading of a portion of TRESE, and also a little talk about how TRESE came to be. So you guys enjoy, have fun, and let's all support TRESE.
I just prepared a very short introduction to TRESE and talking about what is TRESE all about and how I came up with the idea with Kajo Baldissimo. And then afterwards we can talk more about it, or we can talk more about your personal ghost stories or personal aswang stories if you have it. So yes, hi again, I'm Budjette Tan. I've been a comic book fan ever since I was a kid, and I did not outgrow this love for comics. I still freak out my wife when I wear this mask, but yes, I love Batman. I started making comic books when I was, I don't know, was this grade 3 or grade 4? And as you can see, I found some scrap paper at home and just stapled them together and started to make comic books. And what I did back then was after I finished this comic book, I went to my mom and then I sold it to her for 25 centavos. And after she read it, I went to my dad and then I sold it to him for 25 centavos. So I can say that I sold out, my first comic book when it first came out. In 1994, a little after I graduated from college, I became part of Alamat Comics. And most of us were fresh grads, or maybe some of us were just, a year or two into the workforce, but we were all comic book geeks and we all wanted to do comics. So inspired by our favorite comic book creators of the time, and you can see the variety of comics that we came out with back then. So, you had your superheroes, you had very anime, manga inspired, and then you also had very Vertigo comics inspired stories as well. But as you know, a lot of these titles only lasted maybe 1 or 2 issues. We didn't know what we were doing. And we essentially, we invested a lot of time and money into these comics, but at the end of the day, more often than not, we lost money in making these comics. So it wasn't able to sustain itself. But in 2005, Kajo Baldissimo, who I've been collaborating with all that time, eventually sent me a text message. It was almost like a challenge. It was an invitation to make a comic book, a monthly comic book. Was his text to me, and we were both working in ad agencies at the time. They were what do you call this? I was working in the sister agency of McCann, which is where Kajo was working. And like Sarah, if any of you are familiar with life in advertising, especially in Manila, it is a 9 to 5 job. You come in at 9 in the morning and you go home at 5 a.m. the next day. It's an OT, it's an OT culture in Manila. So it just, when Kajo said, "Oh, Budge, gawa naman tayo ng comics." Sabi ko, my reply was, "That's impossible. We can't, I don't think we can finish an issue. And I don't think we can do it monthly," was what I told him. But the interesting thing is that Kadjo gave me a promise. It was a plan. He said, "Here's my plan. If you can give me a 20-page comic book, I will draw it. I will draw 1 page a day. He said, I will spend 1 hour drawing. And usually he did it during his lunch break. So that by the end of the 20 days, you would have 20 pages." So I gave it a shot and I said, "Okay, and he said, "Just give me anything." And at that time, I had a script which I dug up. I sent it to Kadjo, and true enough, he drew 1 page in 1 hour. But the script was about Anton TRESE, who was a tough guy detective. And when I got the drawing, I said, "Wow, this looks so cool. But why does it look like we've seen this character before? We've all, that this guy wearing a jacket and, beating up, 100 bad guys all by himself. It just feels like we've seen it all before." And what clicked in my head then was the question of what haven't we seen? And then which the simple answer was, we haven't seen a tough detective female hero, especially in Pinoy comics or TV or movies for that matter. So I texted back Kadjo. I said, "It's a great drawing. I love the design. I love the character. But what if we made Trese a woman?" And then Kadjo just texted back, "Oh, she would then be so badass if she was a woman." And hence, Alexandra Trese. And this design did not stray far from, if you have this book, you'll see that's the very first drawing of Kadjo back in 2005. And the design never changed ever since he sent it. It just felt like, that's it. That's our character. And again, the thought was, I wanted to write a detective story set in the Philippines, but to make everything be about our folklore and about the supernatural. And yes, it's in a couple of days, you can then get to watch the story of Alexandra Trese. So Trese was greatly inspired by growing up in Manila. I grew up in Quezon City, and then of course, Sundays were spent going around either Green Hills or Makati. But I find it also interesting that as much as our cities are ever-growing modern metropolises, that we still cling to our faith so much. That in the middle of all this modern buildings, that we have 400-year-old churches, and just like in Quiapo, you would have people selling you anting-anting, and potions and mga kandila that supposedly can heal you. So there's this constant. It's not a clash, but it's the traditional and the modern sit side by side each other, and it's normal for us. And growing up in the 80s, this is what I see. This is what I saw. When I saw this in the headlines and learned what a manananggal was, it just made me think that, oh no, this is all real, especially if it's on the headlines of a newspaper, right? This must be real. So in my research, and I spent a lot of time in the library, reading up on ghost stories, reading up on the supernatural. There was an article that came out in the Daily Express in 1973 about a house that was supposedly haunted. And according to the report, a couple had moved in there with their baby, and they moved in with a couple of relatives in the house. And they started to experience, supernatural occurrences. They said that lights would switch on and off by themselves, that they would hear voices coming from empty rooms, or objects would suddenly move by themselves, like a glass suddenly falling off a table, and strange things like that. Now, everything happened to everyone else in the house except the mother in the house. So she didn't believe that the house was haunted. But one particular day, she had just given a bath to her 6-month-old baby. And she put the baby on the bed. She turned around to get clothes. And the moment she looked back at her baby, half of her child's face had wrinkled up to look like the face of an old man. The eye of the child turned gray, and the skin also became gray. And in that moment, she realized that all of the stories that she heard about the house was true. That the house was haunted, and she was looking at her child that had just been possessed by the spirit of the house. So the only thing she could think of doing was she slapped her baby. But the thing on the bed didn't cry. It just stared back at her as if daring her to do it again. And that's when she got down on her knees. And she said she prayed for what felt like the longest time until her baby's face returned to normal. According to the report, the couple that lived there was Budjette Tan. The mom's name is Budjette Tan, and the baby's name is Budjette Tan. That was my childhood. Did you have a nice childhood? I don't know what's worse, getting possessed or wearing this fuchsia jumper. But there, so that was a story. I grew up. You know, my mom constantly told the story every time we had visitors at home. Every time a new relative would come, parents would have stories about, oh, my baby did this really cute thing the other day. You know, my mom would tell the story of like, oh, you know, Budjette was possessed. My dad was the one who told me stories about aswang. It was his way of making me stay in bed. You know, he would tell me, may aswang dyan sa bintana, sa labas ng bintana, o matulog ka na, kakainin ka ng aswang. So there, you know, my childhood was filled with multo inside the house, aswang outside the house. So I think TRESE is therapy for me, just getting this all out there. And that's what happened. It's hearing these stories, you know, hearing about the stories of the White Lady of Balete Drive, the Snake Man under Robinson's Galleria. We all grew up with these stories. But I just decided to take all of these stories and tell them as a detective story. And if you think about it, a lot of these stories have been told and retold in Shake, Rattle, and Roll, in Magandang Gabi Bayan Halloween Special. It's been retold in Regal Shockers. You know, in Tagalog comics, these stories have come up time and again. And for me, it's like, I want answers. and therefore, TRESE is my way of finding the answers to these stories. So part of the process of writing a TRESE story is going back to all of these creatures and monsters that our parents and grandparents used to frighten us when we were kids. One of the books I co-wrote is The Lost Journal of Alejandro Pardo. I co-wrote this with David Hontiveros, and the artwork inside was Kadjo is one of the artists, along with Bo Guerrero and Mervin Malonzo. And this was our take on an updated version of Maximo Ramos's book about Philippine monsters and creatures from folklore. So in the stories, again, we all have our stories of the aswang. And it seems like in every province, as much as we say that the aswang is a shapeshifter, it also changes shape per province. This was from the TV show Grimm, if you were a fan of that. And this was how they depicted the aswang. So again, there is no one way the aswang has been depicted through the years. We of course have our duende who live under the ground. We have our nuno sa punso, and that's why you have to say tabi-tabi po whenever you pass by, a tree with an anthill or a termite mound, and that's why you're not supposed to piss on a tree, or you have to say tabi-tabi po before you relieve yourself by the tree. We've all heard of the manananggal, of course. And thanks to Shake, Rattle, and Roll, that's how I was introduced to the manananggal. The tikbalang is a creature that supposedly waits for you by the crossroads. In provincial crossroads. It is supposedly the reason why when you are walking home you lose your way and you just keep going round and round in circles. But supposedly it will challenge you to a wrestling match, and that if you lose the battle with the tikbalang, you supposedly go insane. But that if you are able to defeat the tikbalang, then the tikbalang grants you a wish. And supposedly the easy way to defeat the tikbalang is you're just supposed to pluck out one hair from its mane. And that's enough for the tikbalang to become to grant you a wish. There's the story of the San Telmo, these balls of fire again that would be seen bouncing on like rice fields or like crossroads. Some fishermen have supposedly seen them bouncing on the horizon, when they go out to fish at like 3 a.m. And according to stories, these balls of fire are actually the souls of people who have died in that area and who did not get a proper burial. And this was their way of like calling attention for themselves. So again, we grew up with all of those stories. And the number one question I ask when writing a TRESE story is, where are they now? Did they move to the city? Are they now somewhere hidden in the city? And this question was inspired by Neil Gaiman when he talked about his inspiration for American gods. And when people migrated from their countries and moved to America, did they bring their gods with them to America? And that's what that novel is all about, and what that TV show is all about, exploring where are these gods now. So I took that same question and I just applied it to the Philippines. In the case of the nuno, it's instead of a nuno sa punso, it is now a nuno sa manhole. And for me, it was like, I thought TRESE needs a network of informants. So therefore, her informants are literally part of the underworld and they are underground. So if you are nice to the nuno and you know how to talk to it properly, then it will give you information. The manananggal are now looking for babies in the high rises of the city, and that's where TRESE battles them. Some of the manananggal have now formed the biggest kidnapping gang in Manila, and they end up in gang wars with the Aswang clan. The tikbalang now don't hang out in the provinces or in country roads. It now hangs out by the highway, and instead of challenging you to a wrestling match, it challenges you to a drag race. And same deal, if you lose the race, you lose your mind. And the San Telmo, TRESE has found a way to summon the San Telmo using a cell phone. So she dials the number of the San Telmo and uses the San Telmo as an informant, especially if the cases involve arson. So for those of you who haven't read TRESE, I wanted to do a really quick reading of the first couple of pages. This was the very first TRESE story. This was the story me and Kadjo made back in 2005. But this has the updated artwork. because Kadjo decided to redraw TRESE when we got picked up by the US publisher. So I'll read through it, and then after this, we can talk more about these scary creatures. So this is at the intersection of Balete and 13th Street. So we start with, we're at Balete Drive, and we see a woman wearing white clothes dead on the street. And the police have arrived at this crime scene, or this car accident scene. And the story starts with, the night wind howls like a wounded, dying animal. One might think the street was mourning this particular death. And one of the policemen says, "Do we take away the body now?" And the senior officer says, "No, not yet. Wait, she's on her way. Sir, the SOCO's already collected all the important evidence." "Good evening, Captain Guerrero. Thanks for calling me." "Hello, Alexandra. I had a feeling you'd want to see this for yourself." "Of course, it's not every day a white lady is found dead, especially on this street." "So, what do you know so far?" "Looks like your typical automobile accident until one of the neighbors identified the victim. Her name was Gina Santos. And the neighbors said, as far as they remember, she died back in the 1960s. "Interesting," says TRESE. "What's this?" And she finds some white dust on the road, picks it up, tastes it, says, "Salty. Seems like we're missing the bigger picture here." And we get a view of the street and see that the white dust has been used to draw a circle at that intersection. Captain Guerrero says, "And it seems like, as usual, you're the only one who has a clue on what this is all about." TRESE says, "Actually, I don't, but I'll look into it. Thanks." And she walks down the street and sees a mound of dirt. And she says, "Tabi-tabi po. Good evening po." "Psst, nobody stays there anymore. Not a good place to stay. Always lots of litter, garbage, not good at all." "Good evening, sir. Can I ask you some questions?" "Depends who's asking." "My name is Alexandra TRESE, and..." "You're Anton Spon. Okay. What do you want to know?" "Did you see what happened here tonight?" No, I try not to get involved in such things." "This was on the street. Do you know what it is?" Yes, salty, ancient." "So what is this powder?" "It's mermaid bones. Bones of a mermaid, ground to dust. Fine. Very useful if one wants to trap spirits. Highly recommended. Better than iodized salt." "And where does one find ground up mermaid bones?" "Sorry, I wouldn't know. Not my territory. Don't like the sea so much." "That would be a good place to start. The sea. Good night, little TRESE. Careful where you tread." The manhole clinks back down on the pavement. So that's the sneak preview. Some of you might have read that issue already, and when if you've seen the trailer and when you watch the first episode, you'll see how much they picked up from that story and used it for the show. I just wanted to end my little talk with, I wanted to show you these covers. I don't know if any of you were well, I don't know if you were a kid back in 1949, but at this, during especially during the 50s and the 60s, I would consider that the golden age of Filipino comics. So, according to the stuff I've read, comics outsold newspapers back then. It was read by everyone, all over the country. And obviously, Darna, Captain Barbell, and so many other characters were adapted into radio plays, became TV shows, and became movies. It used to be just like what's happening now in the US. It used to be the main source of storylines that get adapted. It wasn't called content back then, but that's what it was. but it all went away. By the time the 90s came around and by the 2000s, Atlas Comics and Gasi Comics shut down because they weren't making money anymore. Which leads me to this picture. A couple of years ago, I was at my favorite comic book store, Comic Odyssey. And when I was picking up my comic books, I heard these three voices behind me. And they were very, very excited about something. So I turned around and I saw these three girls. And they were pointing at every character on the shelf. And it was like a contest. They were like naming each character. And they were like picking up their favorites. So you can see the little girl on the right has a comic book on her head. And she's already bending the comic book. But they were so excited. I mean, they saw these characters somewhere or read about them. And they were just talking about, all of their powers and who are the bad guys and the good guys. And it just made me sit and reflect. What do we, how can we, what do we need to do to have this scene again, but have these girls talk about Filipino comics and get them really excited and like, I know that character and this character, that's my favorite. Hindi, ito mas malakas kaysa sa kanya. But that they'd be talking about Filipino heroes and other characters. And I do think we're on our way. If you take a look at PenLab, .Inc., that's already a great start of new Filipino comic book stories. But yes, it is. It's still. We have a very active and supportive comic book community back home, and I think that's the reason why TRESE has lasted so long, along with a whole bunch of other titles. But yes, we need more readers, and hopefully after today, I would have helped you find, aside from TRESE, other new Pinoy comics to read. For the longest time, comic book creation has been very Manila-centric. There have been like one or two, at least the ones we're hearing about, one or two comic book creators from, from Visayas and Mindanao. So it's good. I mean, thanks to the internet, they're starting to put up their works online. So it's again, thank you Facebook and Instagram that they're starting to find ways to get their stories out there. And yeah, as if your story is one example, it's one of those things that a lot of people don't know about, and maybe it's through a story that more Pinoys can learn about it.
What is your advice for, let's say, people in advertising or like busy people who create for a living? And because I'm sort of like the same, I like to write and draw it's therapeutic, but sometimes because of advertising, let's say it's the world you're in, you feel like you have no energy left for yourself. So I guess what's your advice or your tips for people who you have stories to tell, you already have the ideas in your head, it's just sometimes you feel like you have no energy left for yourself to tell those stories. So I guess like any advice for people.
Why do I feel like we've had this conversation before, Sarah?
Because I'm still living a 9-to-5 life, Budge. Yeah. It's still a 9-to-5.
I think I was. The funny thing is that TRESE was made under the same, the same hours we worked. And if I right now I can't remember what was I think I really did end up writing TRESE at the end of the day, right? At the end of our typical work day. And just like if Kajo used up his lunch hour, I used my that 1 hour at the end of the day. And I think that's even if you feel like you're tired, I think as long as you can say and give yourself license to create on that hour. It doesn't, whether it's writing or drawing or painting, whatever it may be. I think in the somewhere in your busy day, you can find, doesn't have to be even an hour. It's like 30 minutes is fine. These days it just it frustrates me at catching myself on Facebook and like going, andali lang, isang oras na yata ako nandito. So if you think about it, there are moments in your day where you can carve out time for yourself. And I think also try out different ways of how to get the story out of yourself. So and like for TRESE, for me, what helped back then, and I still do it now, is I step away from the computer and I write on a notebook. So it's I'm away from the temptation of wanting to, let me just check that on Google and find out when was the Great Binondo Fire, and like I'm Googling, and like 1 hour later I'm watching cat videos on YouTube, right? So it's like why did I go on the Google again? Yes, everything goes back to cat videos. If you start searching, it will lead you to a cat video. So I try to spend that hour or 30 minutes just writing on and there is something about pen and paper, and sometimes nothing comes out. Sometimes it's just a bunch of doodles, a bunch of notes that comes out of that hour. And I think eventually, and it might be frustrating at the beginning, especially if I was about to launch into an exercise, analogy, but I've never exercised in the past couple of years. But it's just like exercising, right? At first, hirap na hirap ka, but eventually, you just you look for that jog, you look for that walk. Or you want to go on that bike ride. So it's the same deal. It's you want to create something for yourself. It just give yourself license and be more forgiving to yourself. If after the hour parang feeling mo, wala akong nagawa, nakakaasar, you will be surprised that when you come back the next day, it actually becomes the foundation for what will eventually become the story. So yeah, a lot of times it's like stories are like, or the thing that you want to solve, the solution comes to you the next day, but you've already made the groundwork of like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. Because this is the way to go. So yeah, just give schedule yourself to do that thing that you want to do.
Well, I just want to share also the same sentiment as everybody else here right now. We just want to thank you, of course, for actually for me, I think this experience now is just like bringing back childhood. Listening to your story, I could relate very much because I would remember back in Iloilo, Ilonggo man ako gali sa mga tag-Ilonggo, hello
Yes.
sa inyo.
Oh my gosh, ang daming Ilonggo.
Yes.
I'm from Iloilo, and
From
I would
Bacolod.
remember, growing up, pag may mga we would have carpenters doing our house. They would bring piles of comic books, and we would rent it from them. Parang 1 peso per comic book per 3 days or 4 days. Kasi we would swap. My mom would read her own favorite comic books. My dad would read, I would read, and then mag-exchange kami. So those were our bonding times before. So kaya it's so nice that after that, kasi when we started growing up, we kind of forgot about comics already, especially when the family computer came out, the internet and everything.
Yep.
Yeah. So we kind of forgot about everything. And recently, I got introduced to comics because of TRESE again. And he's there. Hi. Hello.
Hello.
Ayun. So
there.
it's like going back to what really what really mattered. When things were simple, when things were just, you and the comic book, and you're like in your own world already. You make your own world. And yeah, it's so nice. And also talking about creating things, that's also therapy for me. I got into toy designing lately, and that's also what led me to discovering Trece, is because I was researching for characters for my toy line. Of course, with Carlo helping me out also for Mad Creatives. And ayun, I got hooked. I got hooked with Trece and read the entire line. And one thing led to the other. I already started reading other comics, and I'm like, sabi ko, ang daming characters. So sabi ko, okay, hinay-hinay lang. Hinay-hinay lang. Hindi ko ito mapoproduce lahat. So, but it's been a fun experience so far. I've been a fan of Trece for 3 weeks now. bago pa lang, yeah. And
It's like you've been there forever, Jed.
Yeah, that's true. And I already read the comics a couple times, and I will never get tired of it, kasi there are stories that we grew up with, stories that bring us back. They give us good memories. Like when we're kids, yun nga, like when our parents would talk about mga kwento about the aswang, and tama yan, gagawin nila yan. They would do it for us to stay home or sleep already. So, it gives a nostalgic feeling. So I'm very happy that it's starting to come back again. Well, it was there, but then it was introduced again, and I'm trying my best also to with whatever influence I have. Look at Carlo now. To promote Trece and other works, kasi ang galing eh. And there's a lot of material out there, and sometimes we look outside like the foreign works, but then mas rich yung mga gawa natin dito eh, and it's more colorful and more relatable. So yeah, I'm excited for more experiences with our local comics.
Thanks, Jed. Yeah, again, I hope that it, just like what happened to Jed, that whether it's Trece as the gateway or some other comic book, and we've experienced that. We've experienced people who discovered Trece because they read about her, from another comic book, or they started to read one comic book, and nung naubos na yung mga issues na yun, they said, oh, ano pa ba mga Pinoy comics dyan? So it is out there, except a lot of people just it's just taking time for people to discover them. Yeah, there's a question here saying, was Trece originally intended for a Filipino audience, or was it always intended for an international audience? If yes, how did it affect your storytelling? So I talked a bit about it at the beginning, where Trece was just intended for me and Kadjo. We had, again, a bit of context. We've done comics before, and again, those comics didn't work out for whatever reason. So when we started to do Trece, it was just really for ourselves. There was no plan to pitch it anywhere. There was no plan to, there was no big dream to say, ito na, this is what's gonna make us rich. We were both in advertising. So again, talking about, when I joked about therapy, in a way, Trece was our therapy. We created this for ourselves, knowing that I will make this, and I don't need to get approval from anyone else. I don't need to pitch it to my boss. I don't need to pitch it to my client. I am just making this for myself. And when we finished it, we actually just photocopied 30 copies. Most of that ended up, going to friends. Parang, ginawa ko, bago akong comics. Basahin mo. The rest of the comics we sold at Comic Quest, because we knew the manager of Comic Quest, the owner, is a friend of ours. So we just asked him, can we sell our comics at your place? So that's another reason why, if you read most of the Trece, all of the Trece stories, I don't bother to explain what is a tikbala. even in the White Lady of Balete Drive story, I don't bother to tell you, the whole urban legend of the White Lady. She's just dead at the beginning of the story, because my assumption is that the one who will read this is somebody like me who grew up hearing these stories. So which is why one of the things that we did in the US edition when it came out, this one, the one with the red cover, we added these pages which explain to the foreign readers what these creatures and characters are. But in the past years, we've had foreign readers send us email. So I also, it's so easy to Google about these creatures. So if they ever encounter a word, a phrase, tabi-tabi po, or a creature that they don't know, it's so easy again to just search for it online. But again, that was one of the things that we changed for the US edition. So yeah, it was. But I wrote it in English because I just was one of those kids that just got used to, or is more comfortable in writing and speaking in English. I have tried in the past to write comics in Filipino. They were fun, but I just felt like, again, writing in English is more my strong suit. But that helped. That actually helped, because the moment we were pitching this to publishers, I didn't need to translate it anymore. We've been pitching TRESE ever since it came out, in book form, and we either get ignored or we get a very nice rejection letter from publishers. And it was thanks to the Netflix announcement that Ablaze sent us an email and said, would you be interested to join our new publishing company? And if you take a look at the other titles of Ablaze, they are all, their main editorial line is they want to bring new comics to America. So nagbaliktad na. So they're picking European comics, Japanese, Korean, and I think we're the first Filipino comics that they picked. The TRESE anime had a similar journey. It took 10 years of pitching. It took 10 years of pitching for it to finally become a show. Tanya Yuson is the lady who I met 10 years ago, and she found a copy of TRESE because friends recommended it to her when she said she was looking for a story to produce, to turn into a film. So that was the original intention. They were pitching it to be made into a movie or a live action TV show. In 10 years, they were pitching it. Tanya and Shanti are the partners. And every year they would give me news about, they would fly to LA or they would fly to France to meet with producers. And every year they would say, oh, we met with this producer and we've met with this director and, they're interested. And every year it's like, oh, it's not pushing through. They're not calling back anymore. Or they're not, it's not the right amount of money. Yeah, if you want to produce it right, you want the right kind of financial backing. We talked to local producers. And local producers, of course, are so used to, ano ba yung patok, di ba? They already have their own feeling of what will be a hit. So one of the things that we showed it to a producer in the Philippines, and then one of his first question was, di ba pwedeng bigyan ng love interest si TRESE? Baka dapat bigyan siya ng boyfriend. So it's at that moment we knew it was okay, they don't get this story. Maybe we should go somewhere else. So we could never find that right mix of people who understood it, and then if they did like it, they were saying, okay, maybe we'll produce it only for this much. And Tanya knew, with her experience, Tanya had produced movies and TV shows in Hollywood before coming back to the Philippines. She knew that amount of money wouldn't be able to produce a good-looking film. So in 2018, they found out they had been in talks with Netflix, and they found out that Netflix anime division was looking for stories outside of Japan. So they got this, we got the same pitch material we did for the live action stuff. They revised it a little bit, showed it to the anime division, and started to get positive feedback from it until finally it got greenlit. So yeah, the last thing I wanted to say was that the great thing about Netflix is that they encourage the team. They encourage Tanya to make it as Pinoy as possible. So they didn't hold back. They didn't say, "Oh, maybe you need to change it for the international audience." No, they said, you do it the way you want to do it. Make it as Pinoy as possible. And that's why we ended up with Jay Oliva as a director who's, Pinoy based in the States. And if you look at the cast, they did their very best to find Pinoy talents in LA to do the voice. And of course, you've got this fantastic Pinoy cast in Manila as well. So yeah, suddenly it was worth the wait. We didn't know it would take 10 years, but we found a company like Netflix that just supported your vision and wanted you to bring that vision to life as best way as possible.
Maraming salamat.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
See you again.
Maraming salamat po.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you po
Bye,
talaga.
Sarah.
Subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Bye, guys.
Let's put an end to this.